There's so much media attention about GMO in Hawaii, and finally, people realize this is ground zero for experimentation. It was already going on 60 years ago when Agent Orange was tested in the fields of Kauai, but it continues today, and our communities are being poisoned. And so those of you who are here today, you have a real privilege and honor to meet this young man, Dr. Hector Valenzuela. Let's give him a hand.
Mahalo to MOA, Kakua Ko, Seeds of Truth, Dr. Yi for inviting us to speak, and also mahalo to Dr. Seneff for again coming over to visit with us. I would like to, can everybody hear me okay? I would like to give you a brief update in terms of what has been going on in Hawaii, and also in terms of my perspective about some of the risks about GMOs. The debate in the islands about GMOs has really taken a higher pitch over the past couple of years, and it's really a positive sign that the communities all over the islands have come together to talk about this. But as you would expect, the industry has responded in an even bigger fashion. They are familiar with these type of challenges because they have faced it all over the world, so they know how to respond to community concerns. They have huge PR agencies at the national level that help to define PR strategies at both the national and the local level. So from the public's perspective, it's a matter of almost intellectual self-defense to help to read the type of PR strategy that they're moving through the media, through the press, and through the academy, so that the community can learn how to respond to these mass media attacks on community interest, which is to protect the safety of their food. So I would like to just provide some updates in terms of what has been going on in Hawaii, following by what are some of the industry claims that they have made in terms of the safety of their products. Then some brief updates on risks, evidence of risks, why are some independent scientists asking questions about potential risks, and then just finish off with what we should be really talking about. How can we grow healthy food in Hawaii? How can we achieve self-sufficiency and move in that direction? So there's been quite a commotion. It's been almost a revolt over the past couple of years on the islands. Over 12,000 people have marched the streets from Hilo to Kona to Kauai to Haleiwa. Some marches that have been considered almost the first in many decades in some parts of the island. So just as a brief update in terms of what has been going on over the past couple of years, there's been a couple of bills at the county level. We have tried to pass similar bills at the state level for the past 10 years, but there hasn't been any traction at the state level. So at the county level, the community has been able to move forward a little bit. The one on the left is the Kauai bill that passed last year. Thank you to Gary Husser and Tim Bainham. And this was a pesticide disclosure bill. And pretty much what they were saying is, could you let us know the type of pesticides that you're using around our communities? So if my kids develop some kind of adverse symptoms, they're coughing or some health, they can go to the hospital and they can actually tell the doctor where these are the type of pesticides that they may have been exposed to. So it was asking for disclosure, and also asking for reasonable buffer zones in between the area where these GMO farmers were spraying the farms, and the public schools, or hospitals or public parks. So the bill was asking for a buffer zone between the spraying and these public zones, which was considered to be somewhat of a moderate request. The bill that passed on the Big Island was to place a moratorium on the planting under experimentation of GM crops on the Big Island. Their concern was they saw what happened on Molokai, they saw what happened on Kauai, on West Kauai. They're seeing what's going on in North Shore, in Oahu, and also in Maui. And they said, we don't want that to happen on Big Island, so we would like to stop it and protect it, understand what's going on before we proceed and establish any GM crops on the Big Island. As a response to those bills, the industry responded by raising lawsuits against the counties, both on the Big Island and also on Kauai. On the Big Island, they're challenging the moratorium, and on Kauai, they're challenging the disclosure, the right of the community to know what pesticides are being applied, and they're fighting the buffer zones. So there has been a campaign in response from the community, and this little banner on the right-hand side, which says, "Shame on you, suing Kauai County for the right to know." And they've been taking pictures of this banner everywhere. The one on the bottom is from Barcelona, Spain, and there was one a couple of weeks ago from San Diego, where there was a biotechnology conference going on. As a follow-up to those bills, this year, communities from Maui and also from Kauai initiated what are called county charter amendments. And this is, if there's enough votes from the community, they would place the referendum on the ballot. And the referendums in both islands are to place, again, a moratorium on the planting of GM crops, kind of similar to what the county of Hawaii Island did on Big Island. So they're asking for pretty much the same level of, let's place a moratorium, let's place a stop on this industry, and let's follow the precautionary approach and proceed with this industry once we understand better what are the potential implications or on the environment or on the health of the community. These are still going on. On Kauai, the county is trying to figure out whether it's actually a valid charter amendment or an initiative. If it's a charter, it only requires about 5% of the voters. If it's an initiative, it bumps it up to about 20% of the voters. So they're trying to define all the little logistics. Also, as an update, in November of 2011, the community of Waimea in Kauai filed a lawsuit against Pioneer DuPont, which has been planting GM crops in that area for the past 15 years or so. And this lawsuit is still going through the motions in federal court. So I'll give you a couple of pictures just to give you an idea of what the communities in many parts of our state have been going through over the past 15 years. For a lot of us, this is more theoretical. We did talk about it and we read about it on the magazines. But for these communities, this is something that they have been living day in and day out. The level of dust and dust blowing into their houses, the level of what they claim to be pesticide residues blowing into their houses. For them, this has been on a day-to-day basis. They have seen more adverse health effects, reproductive effects, birth failures, and a series of health problems. And they've been reaching out to the industry and to the different government agencies asking for help. And for many years, nothing happened until finally a lawsuit was filed a couple of years ago. So this map shows where some of the GMO fields are located, and these are genetically modified experimentation, over 5,000 experiments to date in Hawaii, in the state. And you would see somewhat of a similar picture in the other islands, Molokai, Maui, Oahu here in the North Shore, in terms of where the fields are located. They're normally high elevation and downslope. You see all the surfing areas, all the ocean habitats. Because of the lawsuit, there was some disclosure in terms of the amount and number of pesticides. And here we see a list of over 90 pesticide formulations that are being sprayed in Kauai. These are being sprayed over 240 days out of the year. And so that means that almost 6 or 7 days out of 10 days, pesticides are being sprayed. We know that I'm going to mention this later, that the adjuvants or the ingredients that are applied along with the pesticide can also add to the toxicity of the product. And also that the combination of pesticides also may add. So we're not concerned only about one pesticide alone, but how does it interact with other chemicals that are being applied around that area. So we talk about a cocktail of pesticides and how can these affect the health of those that are being exposed. The chemicals also degrade, so then you have the secondary metabolites. So there's question marks also about what happens to the breakdown products of these chemicals. So when you look at the entire picture, it's a high level of complexity, and from the science perspective, we cannot explain what's going on, and we do not have an understanding of what are all the specific health implications of having this cocktail of pesticides being reaching children or the elderly or just the community in general. So this will be a picture of the Waimea area. So the area in red are the corn, the GMO fields from Pioneer to Pond. So this is on the eastern side. In between you have the Waimea River flowing downstream towards the ocean. And on the west side, you have the community of Waimea. On the top right-hand side, you can see the direction of the wind, northeast direction moving towards the west. So you can see the trade wind patterns throughout the year is probably coming from the east side towards the community of Waimea. So any level of wind or dust or drift would go across the river right into the community. Something that you have to realize is that most of the plantings are very small, and that about 90% of those red fields are totally bare ground. That means that these fields have been worked out extensively, so it's almost like a fine dust. So when there's wind, it gets lifted really easy, and it just blows directly either into Waimea or to the ocean or to the community. At the same time, they're applying high levels of chemical fertilizers. And as you know, by gravity, everything tends to flow downstream. Just like if you're driving in Kamehameha in the North Shore towards Haleiwa, the water and the chemicals tend to flow downstream. And eventually, whether it's 10, 15, 75 years, eventually it's going to make it either to the aquifers or to the ocean. And the question mark is, what are the impacts out there on the community or on wildlife habitat? This is another perspective. So here we're looking at the same area from Mauka to Makai. Here we're looking at the Pioneer fields, and you can see the river, and across the river you can see the Waimea community. So again, you can imagine the wind flowing in this direction towards the Waimea community on an annual basis, except when we get the Kona winds. Over the past couple of years after the lawsuit, we've seen a little more planting of crops and cover crops. But formerly, if you see a Google picture, say from the early 2000s, you would see that most of these would be red soil. This is another perspective of fields in Kauai, and again you can see the proximity of these fields to the ocean, so the exposure to the aquatic habitats. Again, high amount of pesticide applications and possibly also chemical fertilizer applications. This will be on the western side of Waimea town. So not only do they have Pioneer on the eastern side, but on the west they also have additional plantings from from other companies. So there's an entire belt of GMO fields that is going throughout West Kauai. And below you can see the list of all the schools that are in proximity to the GMO fields, such as the Waimea Canyon Middle School and so on. And if you follow the media over the past 15 years, you know that there were several incidents where the children got sick in a Waimea Canyon School. They became big incidents, and the community has been trying to find out where did that come out. The county did conduct a study, but I don't know how definite or serious they were to actually find out the source of the cause of the problems. This is some overviews again. You can see the erosion going into the ocean, and if there's intensive agriculture, you can assume that there may be some contaminants, pesticide in the sediments. If you're familiar with plantation agriculture in Hawaii, you would also have seen that image of the drums hanging out in the agricultural fields and waterways. On the right-hand side, you can see all the drip lines, all the plastic drip lines. And again, it gives you an example of the type of things that we would see in agricultural fields in the state. So in terms of pesticides applications, we are concerned about the issue of drift. And drift would talk about the movement of spray droplets or dust particles that move away of the target area. And this is a couple of pictures to give you an idea of what the communities have been experiencing. We drove over the weekend in Molokai, in Kauai as well, and we were driving yesterday through central Oahu, and it's not uncommon to see this level of dust coming up. So these are shots from Molokai when working the field. Some more additional shots from Molokai. And you can see that they may also reach the ocean side. So a couple of points that the industry has raised in response. And what we're doing is feeding the world. So we need biotechnology, we need GMOs because they will feed the world. If not, it's going to come down. And this is an editorial that I brought early on from the food editor of the New York Times, analyzing this perspective. And Mark Bittman is asking, what is the goal of these companies? And he just spells it out. The goal is just to ramp up sales. Their interest is profits, to make money, and the issue of hunger and world hunger is really not backed up by the facts, because most GMOs are for biofuels or for highly processed food products, not food for subsistence farmers. And what is the actual solution to solve world hunger, according to this food editor? He thinks of it as low input, small scale, diversified farms, which is the same thing that we're promoting in Kauai. By coincidence, this week, in the Business Week, they have a feature on Monsanto. It was kind of like almost like a PR article promoting the good guys of Monsanto. Don't blame me don't hate me because I'm beautiful. And so Hawaii is not only one of the centers of research for open field experimentation with GMOs, but we also have the GMO papaya. And the GMO papaya has also almost been used as a poster child to promote GMOs around the world. It was great in Hawaii, it was a success, so everybody should accept it. So this article from Business Week concludes there was also a consensus in a debate that they were having, the creation of a virus-resistant papayas, for example, where genetic engineering has brought clear benefits. So papaya was a benefit, so we should all welcome it. But I have been questioning those statements or that PR saying that papayas save the papaya industry in Hawaii, and I say that the data does not show that, and that in fact it hurt our image in Hawaii in terms of being perceived as an ecological state. So if you look at the actual numbers, The year before the papaya was released in 1998 and 10 years later at the statistics. So in that period of time, we had a 50% reduction in the value of the industry. We had a over 70% decline in the value of exports. We couldn't export to Japan, we couldn't export to Europe. We had a over 50% reduction in the price of papaya, and over 40% of the farmers went out of business. I don't know how can you see that as a success story. To me, it looks like things didn't go properly. If you look at their planning documents, they said that the industry would grow 2 or 3 times as much. They didn't say that it was going to decrease by 50%. And today, they have not come up with a single economic study to back up their statements about how they save the industry. And after the millions of dollars that we have spent at the university over the past 15 to 20 years, this has been the single variety that we have been able to release at the university level. At the same time, the papaya has been an example of a product that we have not been able to contain. So if you are a farmer, one of the basics of farming is that you follow reasonable production practices and that you don't spray your neighbor's farm with chemicals, or you don't have erosion that runs into your farmers. You follow proper farming procedures. But with GM papaya, we haven't been able to follow those practices. And we have seen that those genes have run out past the farm into neighboring farms and into other areas. So we have had several instances of contamination, unapproved contamination. In 2002 in Japan, they found contaminated modified papaya. 2004 in Germany. In 2004, Hawaii seed found high levels of contamination throughout the state in organic farms, and even in the University of Hawaii seed bank had levels of contamination, or traditional varieties. 2004 and 13, again in Thailand, and in last year, a study by UH found over 20% of contamination on the papayas that you would see on the roadsides, just papayas just growing by themselves on the road. So this is an unacceptable level that the genes that they introduced are going into nature, a level of inappropriate contamination of the environment. Another point of consideration are the potential health risks of the papaya, and there has not been a single study that has been conducted to show. We conducted a survey, we conducted a study of animals, and there was nothing wrong. There hasn't been a single study. So when scientists come and say there's nothing wrong with the GMO papaya, in scientific terms, this is something that you can call assumption-based reasoning. And this is nothing more than just an opinion. A researcher saying, oh, I don't think it's harmful, well, that's just an opinion. You actually don't have any data to back up those statements. There has been some studies, however, questioning the science, the technology that was used with papaya, which is called the RNA technology. The insertion in the GMO papaya was based on RNA technology. So this review that came up in last year indicates that there's several unknown effects from using double-stranded RNA technology, on which causes gene silencing and possible secondary metabolites. Gene silencing means when you turn a gene off that is functioning properly and suddenly it turns off because of this double-stranded RNA. There has been follow-up reviews on these DNA segments showing potential risks of this double-stranded RNA technology. Furthermore, in 2012, regulators from Europe recognized that there was a gene segment in GMO papaya that had not been recognized at the time that the GMO papaya was released 15 years earlier. So we inserted a promoter into the papaya and the promoter switches things on, it makes everything run properly. But a gene segment, it attached itself to the promoter without we knowing about it. And apparently we did not, because we didn't know it was there, we didn't report this to regulators. So when you deregulate a product, you are supposed to tell regulators all the constructs that you introduced. There's not supposed to be some kind of hidden genes in there that you were not aware of, because again, there could have been some health risks from these materials. I approached my colleagues, the GMO Papaya team in my department in March of last year, and after over more than 1 year, I still have not received answers to the questions that I asked about what did they know, what kind of studies did they conduct, what information did they provide to our regulators and to the regulators in Japan about the presence of this hidden segment. This is the construct that was introduced in the papaya. So we have the protein that makes the papaya resistant to the virus. We have antibiotic markers that were introduced. That's the Gauss marker. And you can see the green star, and that kind of reflects on the hidden gene segment that kind of hitchhike into the promoter and say, I'm gonna jump in there. It has no function. It has nothing to do with that promoter. It just happens to be there. My question mark is it posing a health risk when we consume it? It may be totally innocuous, it may have nothing wrong to it, but on the other hand, it could be doing something. Again, the problem is that these genes don't just sit there. They're going to jump around, they're going to break out from the plant in the genome, they're going to make multiple copies of themselves, and one specific copy may do something, interact with other genes in ways that are detrimental to the plant or to those that consume it down the road. Again, we're also going to consume it, it's going to get into our bodies, it can interact with genes in our bodies in ways that are totally unpredictable. So it can be totally fine, or there could be some negative consequences. Separately, in the literature, this gene segment is very well understood. So we know how it functions. We just didn't know that it happened to be in the papaya. So these are some of the side effects that the literature has reported about this gene that was introduced in the papaya. It's known to be a plant toxin. It's known to interfere with host plant defenses. Also to interfere with the mechanism of protein production, which is common to both plants and humans, and a disruptor of RNA silencing. One interesting thing that it did, it was exposed to the tobacco plant, and the tobacco plant became susceptible to a disease of cabbages, to a totally different family. So the tobacco became susceptible to a plant that normally tobacco is not susceptible to. So this is just an illustration of something that could go wrong down the road. Separately, a few years back, the Australia Environmental Agency indeed raised some of the potential risks that could occur from introducing viral resistance into plants. This could include, according to this review from Austria, change in the dispersal and the evolution of viruses, and could also bring more viral plant disease and epidemics. So the scientists from UH are saying this virus is everywhere in nature, so there's nothing to worry about. The point is that it does not occur in the specific construct that we are introducing in the GMO papaya, and we're not introducing it into every cell of the plant. This is something that does not occur in nature. Another angle that the industry has come up is that what we're doing is sustainable. And this is an article from Monsanto written in 1990 claiming planetary patriotism, sustainability, and that's what we all are about. And this article has all kinds of promises about drought resistance, water resistance to diseases, all kinds of promises that have not come true to date. Today, we still have the same traits that they introduced back in the old days. So, scientists conducted a review that was published last year about GMO agriculture in the United States, and they compared it to non-GMO agriculture in Europe. They are the same agricultural systems. They have the similar socioeconomic agricultural systems, the same kind of people and so on, economic background. So they compared large sectors of agriculture in the United States that adopted GM crops and large sectors of agriculture in Europe that did not adopt any GM crops. And at the end of the review, they found that the sustainability of the production practices was somewhat higher in the European agricultural systems. So the GMO industry is saying, we need GMOs because we need higher yields, we need less pesticide use, we need this, we need that. And this review showed that that was not the case, that Europe was able to maintain high levels of productivity, maintain lower levels of pesticide use, comparable to those of the United States, even though they were not using GMOs. So the fact that we need GMO papaya, we need GMO taro, we need these GMO crops, this review did not show that this was the case over the past 15 to 20 years. This was an open for Harris Husser that appeared last week, July the 2nd, in the Star Advertiser. And this is kind of a general voice from agricultural sector that is saying we really should change industrial agricultural methods. We should move away from our dependency on high energy, high chemical use, high pesticide use, because we need to be ready for climate change. We need to be ready for the days when energy is just too expensive, when we cannot afford to ship food from California to Hawaii. And this is Gary's commentary reflects on the national statement, which was actually brought up in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. So these are some of the problems with industrial agriculture. So this is problems just with ag in general, even without GMOs. And I call GMOs industrial agriculture version 2.0, or industrial ag in steroids. So what we have seen is general fertility decline of our soils, environmental damage, such as in the Gulf of Mexico, hazards in the food, reduced food quality, energy intensity beyond our means, farmer debt, that means a small margin of profits, and hidden costs to society. We're eating a lot of food, there's a lot of cheap food, but down the road we see higher and higher incidence of diseases. And I believe Professor Seneff is going to mention this. And the President's Panel on the Environment came to the similar conclusions in 2011. And this is what they're saying, that the President's Panel on the Environment. Overuse and the excess application of chemicals to the soil have disrupted natural processes. Habitat loss, air pollution, and chemical pesticides have reduced populations of natural pollinators and natural control agents for agricultural pests. In addition, more than 1/3 of our agricultural soils have been lost to erosion and unsustainable agricultural practices. Decimation of pollinating insects has imposed large costs on agriculture. So obviously this is not the direction that we should be going in Hawaii. We should be going the other way. In a similar way, the American Medical Association has come up with similar statements saying we need to adopt a healthy diet based on pesticide-free whole foods, such as fruits and vegetables. We should move away from the consumption of highly processed food, which almost by coincidence means GMO, grain, soybean, canola oil, and so on. So academics that promote GMOs, that defend their safety, continue to say decades of scientific studies demonstrate their safety and wide-reaching benefits of genetically engineering crops. So are GMOs safe? And it comes down to, it's really difficult or impossible to document their safety if they're not labeled. If they're introduced into the food chain and there's no way for us to label them or identify them, it's impossible to conduct a post-marketing study. So if there's no traceability, there's no liability. However, there is some evidence of potential risk, and this has been building up over the past 15 years. First of all, we're learning that contrary to what they told us early on, DNA doesn't break up automatically in the alimentary tract. And this is just an example of 23 citations from the research literature. Antibiotics and Bt toxins persist in the environment, again, against what they told us early on. As an example, GM markers, antibiotic markers found near wells and the groundwater. Antibiotic markers were recently found in 6 of the major rivers in China, and this means that if this goes into the population, when you get sick, if you go to the clinic, your antibiotic may not work, you may have developed resistance to that specific antibiotic. Similar Bt toxin has been found in streams close to livestock operations.
Where?
In the mainland US. No studies in Hawaii so far. Again, I mentioned earlier segments of RNA, and it has been found that some segments of RNA that is introduced by plants, when you consume them, can affect humans once you consume them. So small segments of RNA that is presented in food, such as in mustard greens, pak choy, they can be transmitted through the food to humans. These segments of RNA, which are called miRNA, they can alter gene expression of target cross-kingdom species. So they can grow across species and alter gene expression. They can regulate the expression of target genes in humans. And as an example, there can be dysregulation of miRNA that has been linked to cancer and other diseases. This has not been shown with GM crops, but this is what some of the what-ifs. What if some of the RNA material that is introduced with GM crops, like from papaya, makes it into the genome and acts in this way, as researchers found in China. So this is just a summary of some of the disorders that I have found in the research literature. This is not a comprehensive review, but just some of the scientific references that I have found based on animal studies of the different organs that have been affected adversely from the consumption of genetically modified crops. So for example, in the digestive system, I found over 14 studies that showed abnormal growth effects on the digestive system, 14 studies on the liver, pancreas, kidney, adverse effects on the blood, immune system, allergic responses, reproductive effects, and toxicity from exposure to Bt toxin. These studies are not conclusive. These studies do not demonstrate that GMOs are bad, but from my perspective, they are raising a red flag. They are a red flag and say, hey guys, we should be looking at this. We shouldn't be saying there's nothing wrong with it. We should be conducting more studies because these are definite studies that need replication, which need to be refuted or validated. In some parts of the world, like Latin America, we have conducted epidemiological studies over the past 15 years. And epidemiological studies consists of looking at rural populations that have been exposed to pesticides from nearby GMO fields, and we compare those to the health of similar ethnic populations in other areas that have not been exposed to the same level of pesticides. Same socioeconomic background, same economic background, same ethnic background, but no pesticides. And these are the effects that have been observed from the pesticides that are used to grow genetically modified crops in South America. These include birth defects, skeletal malformations and growth deformities, 4 times rate of cancer, congenital malformations and stillborns, epidemics of cyclopia or one eye in areas of Colombia exposed to high Roundup applications and from Roundup exposure. Almost similarly, we have observed the same kind of symptoms from studies that have been conducted on amphibians in the wild, such as alligators, frogs, and so on. And in similar way, we have observed the same kind of symptoms from animal studies that we have conducted on the laboratory. So we almost have a triangulation of similar symptoms observed on the population, on wildlife, and in the laboratory. Professor Seneff is going to talk a little bit about this, but this is the famous Seralini study. The study was retracted, which was considered to be a kind of an unethical and unprecedented, because they didn't find anything wrong with the study, and they still decided to retract it a few months after a former Monsanto employee joined the editorial board of that journal. So some of the symptoms that they found was early death, females 2 to 3 times as much as the controls, and earlier death, tumor in males, which developed 4 times as much and up to 600 days earlier than in the controls. Liver problems in males, 2 to 5 times as much than the controls. So the controls did not get Roundup or did not get the GMO Roundup Ready crop. These were controls that got the normal diet. Problems with the kidney, and 66% of the many parameters that were measured were related to kidney disorders. The study found endocrine disruption, and this means hormonal imbalance. And once you disrupt the hormones, this can affect a wide range of physiological aspects. Professor Seneff probably can mention that. Effects on the pituitary gland, and again, sex hormonal balance was modified. And fortunately, a different scientific journal recently republished that study, so today it still stands, and it's up for scientists to follow it up to try to replicate it. And this again contradicts the many statements made by many administrators and professors saying this study has been debunked and it's not valid. In terms of ecological risks, again, the number of scientific citations that I have found for some of the different ecological problems that have been observed, persistence in the environment, over 44 different citations, impacts on microbial activity in the soil, 25 different scientific publications, impacts on non-target organisms, over 30 publications, reduction of biodiversity, impacts of the transgenes on bees populations. That's in addition to the pesticides that are used that may also affect the bees. Impact on secondary pests. That means the big pest is not a problem anymore, so the other guy becomes the big guy on the farm. And the big question for my mind is, what are the things that we don't know? The unintended consequences, and that's the scariest part of the equation. One of the problems with risk assessment is that in the studies that have been provided by industry to regulators, they have been almost looking the other way. So we find that the industry actually does not test the true BT product that is found on the plant. They actually use a surrogate product created by bacteria, and that's the one that they use for experimental purposes. So they have not tested, hey guys, test the actual food that we're consuming as humans to see if that affects the plant, because it's a totally different construct. In a similar fashion, the industry only tests the active ingredient of the pesticide that we're being exposed to. They do not test the entire product that we are being exposed to in the environment. Research studies have found that the entire product could be up to many thousands times as more toxic than the actual ingredient, active ingredient alone. So again, the information that regulators have used to deregulate these products have been based on information that looked at the wrong type of information. The GM crops have been deregulated but using bad science, so that means that we don't have to conduct any safe studies, just like with papaya, because regulators said these crops are substantially equivalent to the traditional papaya. And You may be familiar with another mechanism to make it easier on the industry, and that's to cut the funding of regulatory agencies. So this is a quote from early in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was coming to become a president, and he was going to deregulate the industry. So one of his proposals was a proposed 43% reduction in the EPA's funds for research and development. So they wouldn't have the means to evaluate all the pesticides that are coming into the environment. So we need to recall that pesticides and GM crops are part of the same production package. The top 6 GMO companies also control about 70% of the pesticide market. Several conservative scientific organizations have come up over the past couple of years warning about the risks that children may be exposed to, such as the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, saying we need the right to know, and we're concerned about the effect on reproductive effects and on children. We're learning more and more about the pesticides that are being used, especially about Roundup herbicide. We're learning that it has effects on soil microbiology, impacting nitrogen fixation, microbial activity, yields, the uptake of nutrients in the plant, and we see increased incidence of diseases on the plants. We're also getting more and more information about the potential risks, and realizing that the information that regulators used from industry, they overlooked a lot of real problems based on animal studies. Birth defects, death of the fetus, problems with the lung, kidney, and the heart, endocrine disruption, DNA damage, and problems with the nervous system. We're seeing reduced uptake of micronutrients in plants because of the impact on microbial activity, and this again will make the plants a lot weaker. And just to summarize that again, we're talking almost about the wrong subject, and our energies should be behind healthy agriculture. How should we be taking care of the land in Hawaii? How can we take care of the land and make sure that it's healthy for future generations? And just to mention that we do have the science. It's called ecological agriculture, agroecology. Indigenous populations have followed this approach for thousands of years. The Hawaiian people are the perfect example of how to take care of the land. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge. Organic farmers have been doing this in Hawaii for many decades. So we have that technology, and it's a matter of policymakers, for the university, for academia to come together and say, we can do it, and we're going to follow a scientific approach to develop ecological methods of agriculture in the state. So thanks again, everybody.
We're very, very privileged to have her speak today. So without further ado, Dr. Stephanie Seneff.
Okay, great. All right, my title, Roundup and GMOs, Are We Gambling with the Future of Food? And you can see the picture here. We have a lot of soy. I'm going to be talking a lot about soy, which is the base of the processed food industry in our country, and I think a source of a lot of our troubles. So just want to start with a quote. There are 3 things that can't be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And I like that third one. The truth is going to come out eventually. It's just a matter of how much damage gets done in the meantime. I'm going to start with China because I'm getting very, very interested and excited about China. China has been changing how they feed their population over the past 10, 20 years, more and more relying on imports from the West to replace what used to be food that used to be grown by their farmers, their small farmers in the countryside. So the farmers are disenfranchised, and the people are eating our food, and they are seeing incredible increases in at least these 3 things. And I want to bring out these 3 because these are going to be the focus of my talk. Autism rates have increased 100 times during the past 20 years. Parkinson's disease increased over 20-fold during the past 20 years. And fertility rates have been steadily rising from only 3% in 1972 to today. They have a over 15% infertility problem. So the question this article was asking by this Mi Jianyu, who's the former vice president in the Academy of Military Sciences in China, is there a connection between all this disease that we're seeing and GMO soy imports from the West? So they're becoming alarmed. Their wake is like a sleeping giant waking up, and if they decide we don't want your food, it's going to have a huge impact. Because we won't be able to, just like we can't sell Japan the papayas, all of a sudden we can't sell all this corn and soy to China. That's going to have an impact on our economy and cause us to force us to reconsider how we grow our food. This is what I'm hoping, so I want them to recognize this risk. Okay, so an outline of what's coming. I've been studying autism for about 7 years now, and it took me a long time to figure out the connection with glyphosate, but once I did, it became very clear. Because I knew all these different, autism is a very complex disease, and I could see how all of these things could be explained by the known effects of glyphosate on biological systems. So I'm going to start with autism, and then I'm going to go into soy and discuss how we process our food, why it's dangerous beyond the glyphosate. There's other issues in how we process the food that make it unfit to eat. Then I'm going to have I'm very fascinated by this connection between glyphosate and aluminum. And aluminum, not just in vaccines, and many of you may not be aware, but the vaccines contain a significant amount of aluminum they use as an adjuvant. And I was studying aluminum first because I know a lot of the parents are concerned about the aluminum, or about the vaccines in general. And you can see a connection between the aluminum in the vaccines and autism, but it's a more complicated formula, and it turns out that the aluminum and the glyphosate are working synergistically to cause harm, which is what I believe at this point. And I'll show some plots that might suggest that. Then I'm getting into this is a new topic, by the way, the bile acids. You guys are hearing it for the first time. I've given a lot of talks on glyphosate, so you're going to hear some new material that no one else has heard yet, so you're privileged in that respect. I'm really zeroing in on this problem with bile acids, which is delivered, sends out these bile acids to the gut and helps the gut digest food. And the bile acids are very important for lots of things, including the gut bacteria. And the glyphosate appears to mess up the flow of the bile acids, which then has a lot of interesting consequences. And I will only talk about some of them, in particular two, which is the effect on certain toxic metals, or metals, not necessarily toxic metals. Arsenic is toxic. There's no good use for it in biology. And there's been an identified connection between kidney failure and arsenic and glyphosate in Sri Lanka that I will talk about. And then manganese is actually a very interesting mineral that is essential and has a lot of roles in the body, but also can be toxic if it accumulates in the wrong place. So we're getting both manganese deficiency and manganese toxicity. Today I will only talk about toxicity. I have also a lot of slides on manganese deficiency that I will not talk about because it would be too long to talk. And then the last section will be on infertility and congenital malformation. So we have a lot of stuff coming, and I'll try to go more quickly looking forward. So autism and glyphosate, this is a stunning plot that really shocks me even as I see it again after so many times. The blue is the first grade records of autism according to the US. The US has a dispensation, so if you're diagnosed with autism, you get special attention in the public schools. Looking at 1991 on the left, and I guess I have a pointer here. Yeah, 1991 on the left and 2011 on the right. A very steady increase, and a rather scary, even curving this way, increase in the number of kids in the first grade diagnosed with autism. And the red is the amount of glyphosate used on corn and soy crops in the US over the previous 4 years. So there's an integration over the previous 4 years, looking at that child's life from the age of 2 to the age of 6. And it's an estimate of how much glyphosate they could be exposed to. It's a perfect match, 0.997 Pearson correlation coefficient. It does not get better than that. I have never seen data like this. And when you look at all the other herbicides and pesticides, none of them are going up like this. Glyphosate is the single one that is rising with this kind of intensity. And I'll get to the reason why in a moment. So it's very disturbing. Seeing a plot like this, you have to say, let's look and see. You know, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. Lots of things are going up. Let's look and see, you know. Look at what glyphosate does, look at what autism is. can you connect those? So that's what I did. So a brief history of glyphosate. It's the active ingredient in the pervasive herbicide Roundup. You go down to the hardware store, you buy it, you kill your weeds in your yard. I would recommend that you not do that anymore if you do that. I've never used Roundup, and I'm very proud of that fact. We had a lot of weeds in our yard, and our neighbors weren't so happy, but you should wear your weeds with a badge of honor, in my opinion. GMO Roundup ready crops, they have a whole bunch now: soy, corn, canola, sugar beets, cotton, tobacco, and alfalfa. These are kind of the big core crops in the country. And it's great because you can just spray the Roundup right on the plant and it won't die. So you don't have to worry about, trying to put the Roundup in before you grow the crop, or avoiding the plant, just hitting the weed. It's much, much easier. Just take, spray it from the air all over the crop. The crop soaks it up, it gets into the food, and nobody's bothering to measure to see how much. That's the really scary part. So what happened, of course, they said they was going to make that much less. They thought somehow, I can't imagine how, that it was going to lead to less use of herbicide, but in fact, as you can see, it did the exact opposite. It's going up right in step with the increase in the amount of GMO crops, and the reason is because we're coming up with Roundup-ready weeds. I mean, you might predict that. Biology is always like that. The enemy is smart, and they come up with a way to get around the problem. So now we have these weeds you can't kill with Roundup, you have to use more and more. And now they're starting to introduce GMOs for other herbicides that are considered to be more toxic than Roundup, such as 2,4-D and atrazine. They're probably here in Kauai, they're designing new GMOs for these additional herbicides. So you can have both. You can spray both on now and the plant won't die. And I don't even want to think about how that's going to look in terms of our children's health. So Monsanto assures regulatory bodies that glyphosate is practically non-toxic to humans. That's why they don't worry about it. And therefore, very little monitoring of glyphosate levels in the food, so we don't know how much is there. So I started taking a look and reading the literature. There is a modest literature because Monsanto has sort of assured everybody it's safe, and therefore not that many people are looking. But those who are looking are finding a lot of effects of glyphosate. And one of the big ones is the gut bacteria. It kills the beneficial bacteria, allows the pathogens to overgrow, and a disrupted gut is a feature of autism. It interferes with a class of enzymes called cytochrome P450 enzymes, and I'll get to this later, but a whole bunch of these type enzymes are involved in the bile acid production in the liver. So that's why it messes up the bile acids. Hector mentioned that it chelates minerals, so you get depletion of these minerals in the food that you're eating because it's holding it in the soil, not allowing it to get into the plant. And it also chelates the minerals in your gut and messes up your gut bacteria. And then it sort of takes the minerals to the wrong place in your body and doesn't let them distribute evenly over your body. So you get deficiencies and toxicities at the same time in those minerals. It interferes with the synthesis of the products of this pathway that it disrupts. So Monsanto says, it disrupts the shikimate pathway, biological pathway. Humans don't have that pathway, therefore it's safe. And in fact, our gut bacteria do have that pathway, and they use it to make these essential products for us. So when we don't have those products because the bacteria can't make them, we become deficient in the things that are derived from those amino acids, which includes a whole bunch of neurotransmitters, folate, vitamin E. There's a lot of really important nutrients that come out of that pathway that we're relying on our bacteria to provide. And then finally, it disrupts a whole bunch of things having to do with sulfur metabolism, which is my area of expertise, and I've written a lot about sulfur. I can see why now sulfur's messed up in the body because the glyphosate is doing that. So we have this long paper, Samson and Seneff, from Entropy. It's available. You don't have to pay $40 for it. It's an open access journal if you want to learn more about all that. So I don't want to go into all detail here this time. I've talked about this many times, but here's a list of various problems in autism, and I was trying to mention most of them here. The methionine is a sulfur problem. Serotonin and melatonin come from the shikimate pathway. The aromatase is a cytochrome P450 enzyme that glyphosate disrupts. We have the mineral deficiencies. P-cresol is produced by the pathogens in the gut. And then these last two are due to a manganese deficiency in the body. So I can explain all of these on the basis of what glyphosate does to biological systems. And again, that's from that article. So another thing really interesting is that you can do a plot of glyphosate usage on corn and soy against Alzheimer's disease, dementia. And you see, again, an extremely good match. And I have suspected that dementia and autism have a lot in common. When you read about what the features of those diseases in the brain, you see a lot of similarities. And I think it's basically the same disease manifested in different age groups in the country. So soy, why it's dangerous. There's a beautiful soy field being sprayed with Roundup. We produce a huge amount of soy, and that's at the base of our processed food industry. This is a study, one of the very few studies that have looked at glyphosate in food. These people looked at 3 different kinds of soy. The left one is organic, the middle one is conventional, and you don't even see them. The left, organic, conventional, and then the GMO Roundup Ready soy. And they're looking at the amount of glyphosate. The red is glyphosate, and the blue is AMPA, which is a breakdown product of glyphosate that's equally toxic. And so Monsanto themselves claimed that anything above 5.6 would be extreme levels. They said this in 1999. This is today, and there's 5.6, so we've got extreme levels in 70% of these soy samples that these people measured. There's the 5.6. So this is the Seralini paper, some pictures from it. Some of you might have seen these on the web. They really circulate over the web with this study. And Hector mentioned this already, so I'll go through this quickly. The point that it was retracted and then it was republished, thank goodness, in a new journal. And then they published alongside it another paper that pointed out this political side of this problem of the killing the opposition by retracting the papers. And I think that is just a really terrible thing that's going on, where the chemical industries are able to manipulate what gets published. And if they don't, if they miss something, they can get it out of the publication record later on by kind of finding some way. And in this case, it's a historic example of conflicts of interest. And it's unsubstantiated allegations of fraud and errors. They were just looking for something they could find to try to get it taken back. Conflicts of interest in the editorial board. Inconclusive was the final word on why it was retracted. And if it's retracted on inconclusive, then all the other studies on glyphosate would need to be retracted as well, all the ones that showed no damage. And so this is a real problem. Science is no longer something you can trust, you know. So the reason given to retract our paper inconclusiveness is unprecedented and violates the norms of scientific publishing. The decision to retract cannot be rationalized on any discernible scientific grounds. Censorship on research into the risks of a technology so critically entwined with global food safety undermines the value and the credibility of science. I mean, this is an incredible thing. First of all, our food is not safe, and secondly, we can't trust our science. 2 things that are really awful that are coming out of this exercise of retracting this paper. So fortunately, it got republished, and now it's back in the research literature, and hopefully it will be listened to. And so this is, Hector actually probably said this better, but I'm just summarizing the effects. The mammary tumors in the females. The males had a lot of issues with their liver and kidney, including tumors. Sex hormone disruption and endocrine disruption in both males and females. Enhanced oxidative stress, which is a major problem in all your cells. It causes it underlying all of our diseases. And then kidney dysfunction. And then the effects did not become apparent until 4 months. This is important. At 3 months, they looked fine. All the studies that Monsanto has done end at 3 months. And it's actually a regulatory standard that you only need to study for 3 months to decide if a chemical is toxic or not. And you wonder where that standard came from, because glyphosate takes time. That's one of the issues, is that you don't notice a problem at first. It's not like you suddenly get a stomachache or anything. It's just a slow poison over time. So now I'm going to get into another topic, hexane, which I'm only starting to look at now. So this is some of my new material. And I don't have the whole story here, but I'm suspecting that the hexane is working with the glyphosate synergistically, because hexane is used to separate the oil and the protein from the soybeans. Then you sell soybean oil over here, and you sell protein bars over here. It's separated out from the original soybean using this very toxic chemical hexane. And you produce the protein isolate and the soy lecithin as well as the soybean oil. And the oil then goes into the soy-based. The oil goes into the soil-based formula for the babies. So, so they've looked at hexane's toxic effects when it's inhaled. It's not the same as getting it in your food, but you see a lot of problems, dizziness, low levels. It will cause dizziness, headaches, nausea, vomiting. So These are kind of general maladies. If it's too high, you'll die from asphyxiation. But if you have chronic low-grade exposure, you get things like peripheral neuropathy, pain, weakness, loss of sensation, impaired gait, muscle atrophy, and visual disturbances. These are a lot of things that people are experiencing these days. So it could be they're getting it from this. Of course, there are many, many other toxic chemicals out there as well, so we don't know, but this is a possibility. Interestingly, both China and Europe have standards on how much hexane can be in food. Europe's standards are much more rigorous than China's. China has a much higher allowance level. The US doesn't restrict how much hexane is in food and doesn't require it to be tested. So we don't know, and we don't care in this country. So soy formula has been linked to seizures and autism. This is a paper that showed a several-fold increase in seizures for autistic kids being fed soy instead of being fed milk-based nursing or milk-based formula. A hint that the soy might have a problem. Protein bars, I've never had one. I've always been suspicious of them. And again, this is a quote from this article on the web. Most soy protein ingredients in meat analogs, you're getting the sort of fake meat in the hamburger, nutrition bars, they're listed on the labels as soy protein isolate, soy protein concentrate, or textured vegetable protein. You need to look at that in your product. If you see a product with that in there, I would recommend not buying it, unless it's organic, in which case it's probably okay. Undergone hexane processing to get that protein out, and the hexane is probably in the bar. I mean, this is just an example of the kind of food we're eating today. I just think it's amazing that people buy this stuff, you know? You look at this list, and I've just sort of highlighted and accented in red some of the obvious ones that are problematic. The soy oil, the soy protein isolate, corn oil, corn maltodextrin, canola oil, whey protein content, soy lecithin. All of these things are these derivatives from these GMO Roundup Ready crops. So you're going to get, for sure, probably, I mean, I think it hasn't been measured, but glyphosate and this hexane in these foods. Now, so I started looking into vegetable oil consumption, just looking over time. I do a lot of this kind of statistics, you know, because I'm a computer scientist, rummaging through all the data, trying to find correlations. That's part of what I do. When I find a correlation, I try to figure out why. So we're looking at, Nancy Swanson is doing this with me. We're having a lot of fun going through all the data and seeing what we can find. This just shows vegetable oil consumption over time. Again, starting in 1981 on the left, and going to 2010 on the right. And you can see there's a steady rise. This is disappearance of the domestic vegetable oil that's being made for all uses. So this is human use, the animal use, and even the industrial use. So this is a little bit mixed up. But one thing you can see is that this blue line is soy, and then the orange is everything. So soy is about 80%. So we're really, really eating a lot of soybean oil. That's sort of one of the really cheap oils that we can get easily, and it goes into all the processed food. Now, so this is consumption. This is strictly human consumption. And this plot caught my eye. Well, here you have the blue on the bottom is what they call baking and frying fats. And so I'm thinking that that's the things like Crisco. This is vegetable oil-based Crisco. So this is going to be the things that have the issues with the trans fats. And then the red is salad and cooking oils. That's going to be, you know, mostly the soybean oil, the corn oil, that kind of thing, canola oil. The green is a combination of those two. So you can see the blue is going up sharply right around 2000, and the red is also going up. Red continues to go up and blue goes back down. The green is the sum of the two there. And you can see that it rises very sharply right there around 2000. And that caught my eye because I've been looking for something with that pattern to try to understand a plot that I will show you next, which is this one. And here that red plot is the same plot on a different scale as what we just saw before. That's the combination of all the vegetable oils, excluding the animal-based oils, the butter and the lard, which were shrinking over that same time. Over that sharp rise in 2000, the amount of butter and lard was shrinking while the amount of oil was going up, vegetable oil. And what it's going up in step with, this other curve, the blue, is interesting. You take the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, and they have thousands of reports, hundreds of thousands of reports in there going back to 1990, and I've studied it in a lot of different ways. This is just looking at, for each report, did it mention in the report somewhere autism, anxiety disorder, or pervasive developmental delay? So if it mentioned any one of those, that report gets counted. And what you find is that before 2000, there were very few. And at 2000, there was a huge rise. And then it kind of bounced around again after that. So I've been curious about what happened in 2000 that could explain that sudden rise in all those cases of kids, not necessarily getting it because of the vaccine. They could have walked into the vaccine with autism. I wasn't distinguishing that. Or it could have said they got the autism after the vaccine and they think it might or might not be related. But the fact is they got it. So more and more people got these problems after around 2000, right in step with this increase in the use of these vegetable oils. And of course, at the same time, this is when the GMO Roundup Ready was just coming in as well. About around 1995, 1996, that started to appear. So it's not proof, and I don't have the explanation yet, but it's an interesting observation that you see here. So now, glyphosate, aluminum, and vaccines. This is another plot from the VARs. This is three things. The red is the children with autism in the US, in the public school system over all the grades. The blue is glyphosate usage on corn and soy. Those two line up pretty well, not quite as spectacularly as the earlier plot where I was looking at the integration over time. The yellow is the total number of adverse reaction reports in VARs over time. So the number of peak kids who are reacting to vaccines is going up a lot over the past 10 years or 15 years compared to before that. More kids are reacting to vaccines, or more reports are being made. We don't know which, right? You have to always be a little careful there. But all of these three kind of line up, and that's an interesting observation that might be related. So my thought is that the glyphosate makes the aluminum and possibly the mercury as well in the vaccines much more toxic than they would otherwise be. So as the glyphosate usage is going up, the kids are getting more exposure to that. They walk into the vaccine and they're more likely to get an adverse reaction. That's the thought that I have. I had written a paper before I was worried about glyphosate at all with some co-authors called Empirical Data Confirm Autism Symptoms Related to Aluminum and Acetaminophen Exposures. This was looking at the VARS database, and I saw that there was a connection between the aluminum in the vaccines and the autism, and also the acetaminophen is the Tylenol that you might give the child to cut back the fever after the vaccine. And so what I've later found out is that glyphosate enhances aluminum's toxicity, and that glyphosate interferes with the ability to break down acetaminophen. So glyphosate would make both of these more toxic than they would otherwise be. So this is hinting at an explanation for what we just saw in the previous slide. Here's a paper that talked about how glyphosate chelates aluminum. These are lovely molecular pictures of glyphosate molecules surrounding the aluminum atom, which is the pink one in the middle. So it hides the +3 charge of the aluminum, lets it get into the body like a stealth bomb, and delivers it past the gut because of this effect. It's something that's well known for aluminum citrate, which is shown up there on the corner. There's papers about aluminum citrate's ability to allow aluminum to get in past the gut. So it's the same idea by caging it that the glyphosate also does. There have not been any papers written saying that glyphosate does this, but because glyphosate cages just like citrate, you might assume that it does. And people get gut problems because of the glyphosate, which can cause them to take antacids, and many of those antacids, such as this Gelusil here, that little tiny thing that's circled in red says alumina. So the antacids often contain aluminum, which the glyphosate will then help get past the gut, and then it'll make its way to the brain. So it's quite scary to think about that. So now another plot showing again that is that picture of the kids with the autism, the developmental delay, and anxiety disorder with that sharp rise at the year 2000. And now what I put on top of it is the integrated total amount of aluminum and mercury in those vaccines in those reports. So you can see that the sharp rise at 2000 coincides with the sharp rise in the amount of aluminum in those vaccine reports. That's another match. So we've got those three things, the soybean oil, the aluminum in the vaccines, and the mercury, and the children getting all this autism, anxiety, and developmental delay. And then just showing again that other plot so that you can see both of these have that. This is a hard thing to match, to get that kind of sharp rise there at a particular point in time, and both of those match it. Okay, so now we say hexane and glyphosate are working synergistically with aluminum and mercury to sensitize children to vaccines. That would be the working hypothesis that I would have at this point. I'm still researching it. Okay, bile acids disruption by glyphosate. This is a study I was very happy to find. Again, you've got obscure studies. This is studying carp in Africa and looking at what glyphosate does to them. But they particularly noticed this effect on the bile acids and liver congestion. So this is suggesting sort of backed up bile acids with what they call bile ductular epithelium proliferation. And this kind of proliferation is associated with liver fibrosis, which is another problem that people are having today. So what does this mean? So my hypothesis is that bile flow is impeded because the bile acids are not converted to the more hydrophilic form that would allow them to flow. They need these cytochrome P450 enzymes to do that, and glyphosate disrupts those enzymes. So then when the bile acids are not oxidized by these CYP enzymes, they become toxic to the liver. And the other thing is that usually manganese and arsenic are managed by the body by circulating them through the bile acids. In fact, this allows the gut bacteria multiple chances to get at the manganese, which they really love. The gut bacteria need the manganese to be healthy, and the bile acids provide it to them around and around multiple times. But if the bile acids are stuck, then the bacteria can't get the manganese, and the manganese piles up in the liver. And this will cause toxicity in the liver. So it's a really messy situation with insufficient manganese in the gut and too much manganese in the liver. So I'm going to talk now about both arsenic and the manganese. Arsenic is toxic. Biology doesn't use it for anything. What happens if you can't get rid of it through the bile acids is that you have to find another way. It goes out through the urine. So it piles up in the kidney and kills the kidney. And so this is what was reported on in a study. And in fact, glutathione depletes. Glyphosate depletes glutathione in the liver. I've had papers that have shown that, which you would expect, given everything else that it does. I can explain why that would be so. But the glutathione is needed to detoxify the arsenic. So you've got lots of problems there. The arsenic gets shipped to the kidneys. This is the paper that I was really thrilled to find from Sri Lanka. Glyphosate, hard water, and nephrotoxic metals. What they mean by nephrotoxic metals is arsenic. And they talk about the combination of those two working synergistically, where glyphosate carries in the arsenic like a stealth bomb, past the liver and takes it to the kidneys and unloads it there and kills the kidneys. And so Sri Lanka reacted very quickly to this. They had these farmers, agricultural workers who were dying at a young age from kidney failure, and they banned glyphosate usage in agriculture there as a consequence of this paper. Very, very exciting to see that a country would be so proactive. And this problem didn't exist in Sri Lanka before the 1990s when they started introducing the glyphosate into the farming. So this is a plot, another plot from the US, looking at, again, glyphosate usage on corn and soy, which is the red. And the blue is the percentage of the corn and soy that's GMO. You can see those two kind of go up about the same, a little bit more aggressive rise on the GMO percentage, and then the glyphosate goes right up behind it. And then sandwiched between those two is the yellow boxes, which are the acute kidney disease death rate in the US. So we have this problem too. We've got people whose kidneys are being destroyed by glyphosate, possibly in conjunction with arsenic or in conjunction with other toxic metals. So manganese toxicity goes to Parkinson's disease. This one, I've been really interested in Parkinson's disease and struggling for a long time to try to understand it. I have a personal reason, because my mother died of Parkinson's disease, so I've always cared about Parkinson's. It's a hard one to understand, but I think I'm getting a handle on it because of glyphosate. And the situation is very interesting. So we're going to start off here with this. I was really surprised to find this article that showed that you could they use manganese plus bilirubin to produce blockage of the bile acids in a mouse model of cholestasis, which is the blocked bile acids. So they can cause the bile acids not to flow by exposing them to manganese and bilirubin. So you want to look at glyphosate and see what it does to fertility, and you can find a lot of damage both to the sperm and to the helper cells that support the sperm. This was a paper that talked about acute exposure to 60-day-old male rats over an 8-day period. And they looked to see what was going on. And what they noticed was that aromatase measured, the gene for aromatase was upregulated. So it was producing also more aromatase protein. So it was the rats were producing lots of aromatase in their testes. And the reason is because aromatase is a cytochrome P450 enzyme that gets disrupted by glyphosate. So they have to make more to compensate for the fact that it's not working very well. And aromatase is a very important enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen, and its deficiency is associated with autism. So this is the explanation. Aromatase is a CYP enzyme, glyphosate suppresses CYP enzymes, upregulation required to compensate. Male fertility, so here was an article about Europe being very upset. Europe is actually in trouble with fertility as well. And this was a study of over 25,000 men in France, and they found their sperm concentration had decreased by 32% since the 1990s, and that the numbers were steadily dropping 2% per year over that time period. And also the proportion of normal-looking sperm had also dropped by about 1/3. This is a nice article written by Nancy Swanson. She's the woman that I've been collaborating with on all these plots. In this article, she talks about a lot of different studies showing various problems with fertility associated with herbicides, particularly glyphosate. And this is just a plot from a paper that she referenced about the sperm concentration in France, and showing both the drop in the count and the drop in the number of sperm that are normal over time, going from 1989 to 2005. So this was a study on rabbits, looked at a chemical called carbofuran, which I don't know much about, and also glyphosate, and looked at the semen characteristics of the rabbits. Found a whole bunch of problems with both of these chemicals. Decline in body weight, decline in libido, ejaculate volume, sperm concentration, semen initial fructose and semen osmolality, all these things. Increases in the abnormal and dead sperm. And then this methylene blue reduction time is an indicator of fertility, and it was also impaired. So an interesting link between sperm and manganese. Because the manganese piles up in the liver and then goes to the brain, it doesn't make it to the rest of the body. So the sperm are going to be deficient while the brain and the liver are suffering with too much. And manganese is interestingly a cofactor for an enzyme called adenylate cyclase. The form of adenylate cyclase in the sperm is uniquely dependent on manganese. The other forms are not. So that is going to be needed to make them able to move. So it's going to mess up their motility if they can't get enough manganese, which is likely happening in conjunction with glyphosate because of this interference with its distribution. This was an article on Sertoli cells, which are helper cells in the testis that support the sperm. And they had all kinds of problems. They used a concentration that was 10-fold more dilute than that recommended for herbicide action. And they saw glutathione depletion. The fats and the proteins were getting oxidized. Calcium channels were activated, and that's causing ER stress and inducing cell death. And then there was an increased permeability of the mitochondrial membranes to calcium and to protons. So the cells are basically falling apart. This is a paper, an article about the situation in Tacoma, Washington. These are babies that are being born with basically a very small brain or no brain at all. There's an epidemic of this kind of birth. Also, the one eye that Hector mentioned as well, Cyclops, is happening in places that are exposed to glyphosate. But these guys have a way, this is an extremely, extremely rare disorder. Should be one in the US over the entire year. And they've had several cases, like 20 cases of this in this area in Tacoma, Washington. And if you look at these blue plots in the middle here, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, right in 2010 when this was starting to happen, they had a huge usage of glyphosate to kill noxious weeds that were growing along the waterways. So I think they got overexposure in the womb to glyphosate that caused this damage. And they studied all kinds of chemicals that were being used. They were using, of course, lots of toxic chemicals in the agriculture. They studied some 60 of them. They didn't study glyphosate because it's harmless. However, glyphosate has been shown to cause microcephaly and also cyclopia, the one eye, in studies on frogs. So they certainly should have known to study it. It, again, because of the suppression of CYP enzymes, it's going to cause retinoic acid to build up because it doesn't get broken down in the liver. And that's going to cause, that's known to cause microcephaly through these biological reactions. So, and that's the small brain. Just one last plot. This is just a sort of homework for me because this is curious that in China, Nancy and I are looking at plots. This one is striking. In China, there's a alarming increase in congenital heart disease. Perinatal, this is at birth, kids being born with heart problems, that's lining up with imports, soybean imports from the West. So is there a connection? We don't know, but it's just sort of another thing to study. So I will leave you with that one. So thank you for going organic, and I hope you will tell your friends.
Thank you, Dr. Seneff. That was really awesome.